Spaghetti with the Yeti. Adam and Charlotte Julian Lee Wildish. A boy called George had an excellent plan to go and discover the Yeti. He put in his backpack a warm woolly hat, a map, and a tin of spaghetti. Slowly, George climbed up a steep mountain path in search of the mythical beast when he stumbled straight into a monster who was eating a sumptuous feast. "Hooray!" shouted George. "I knew you'd be here. I'm sure that you must be the Yeti." The monster stood up with a furious gaze. "Are you crazy? My name is Betty." So he stumbled into Betty first. "So sorry, Betty," said George with a smile, "but I'm taking the Yeti some lunch. In that case, you'll want to take some of these bones, for the Yeti likes food with a crunch." So George climbed on up the steep mountain path to track down the hideaway brute when he stumbled upon a big monster with a face like a battered old boot. "Yippee!" shouted George. "I've tracked you down now. I've been searching so long for the Yeti." The monster glared down with the angriest growl. "How insulting! My name is Hetty." So now he's bumped into Hetty. "So sorry, Hetty," said George with a sigh, "but I'm taking the Yeti a treat. In that case, you'll want to take one of these goats, for the Yeti likes food with a bleat." Uh-oh. So George trudged on up the steep mountain path, dragging the goat by her tail, when he spotted a shape in the distance and heard the most bone-chilling wail. "Hooray!" shouted George. "At last, it is you. I've been looking so hard for the Yeti." The monster looked down with a horrible howl. "Are you bonkers? My name is Nettie." So he's ran into Betty, Hetty, and Nettie. "So sorry, Nettie," sighed George, feeling glum, "but I'm taking the Yeti a snack. In that case, you'll want to take lobsters and crabs, for the Yeti likes food he can crack." So George plodded on up the steep mountain path. The difficult climb made him puff. Exhausted, he threw himself down on the ground. "That's it," he cried. "I've had enough." As George sat hopelessly, his head in his hands, a shadow fell over that place. He felt something hairy, a prod in the back, and then turned and peered up at a face. So there's that face. Wonder who that is. "I found you!" cried George with a big happy grin, and he showed all his gifts to the Yeti. But the monster looked down at the crab and the goat and said, "Sorry, I just eat spaghetti." "I knew it," said George with a whoop of delight, and he opened the battered old tin. Then he tipped the spaghetti out into a bowl. So there he is, getting the spaghetti ready. And George and the Yeti tucked in. So they're slurping up the spaghetti. Slurp. So he found the Yeti. He gave him spaghetti. So our craft today, to go with our Spaghetti with the Yeti book, is our very own Yeti. So this is what he's going to look like when we're finished. So I'm just going to set him down here till we're done. So I started out with 2 plates. I've just used the thinner, more flimsy paper plates, and I've attached them. You can do it with tape, glue. I stapled and I taped to make sure that I got it together nicely. So our first thing we need to do is to make the inside of the Yeti's face blue. Because he usually lives in cold places and his face is blue, I guess. So we're going to roughly cut a circle. It doesn't need to be perfect because we're going to mostly cover it with his fur. So we're just going to do a quick cut of a circle. And we're going to attach that onto the top of our plate. If you'll notice, it's not really that perfect. We're going to cover it up anyways. So there's the first step. And the next step we need to do is make a mouth. So it's kind of a half circle. So I've used a piece of black construction paper and I've cut out a half circle. And we're going to attach that down low. His mouth is at the bottom part of the plate. So I'm going to attach that. All right, so it's coming together. Got the face, the back of his mouth, and inside his mouth he has a tongue. So just use some red paper and cut out a piece for his tongue. Doesn't matter what shape. Yetis stick their tongue out. It's probably always a funny shape. All right, so now we've got face, mouth, tongue. The next part that we're going to move on to are his teeth. So all I did was take some pieces of white paper, or you can use a leftover piece of a plate, and I'm going to cut some teeth. So all I did was just take my scissors and cut into my semicircle. And it doesn't matter how many teeth or which way the teeth point. So then I'm going to fit those onto the front of his mouth. So if you can see, we have, if we put them up here, you won't be able to see his tongue. So I'm just going to cut off the bottom. So all I have is just a little section of teeth sticking up. So I'm going to use my scissors and I'm going to cut this more straight so it's easier to glue. And I'm going to put some glue on the back. You don't have to glue the teeth right down, you can just glue the bottom of the teeth. So I've glued the bottom strip of his teeth so that his teeth stick out a little bit. And then I'm going to do the same on the top. I'm going to put a few teeth, maybe not quite as many on the top. So I'm just going to cut into my paper, making triangle points. And then I'm going to trim that so it's a little thinner. And then I'm just going to line it up and look and see like how close do I want those teeth. So I'm going to add that onto my... All right, so that's where we're at. So the next part of our Yeti are his big eyes. So for his eyes, I just used like a regular piece of paper. And I've got a circle drawn on there with a black marker, and I have like a nice thick ring for his outside of his eyes. So we're gonna need 2 of those. So you can either cut them out and outline them after. So I've got 2, I need to outline 1. So we're going to attach his eyes up top, and after we're going to add some fur in between his mouth and his eyes so we can adjust those eyes wherever we want. I'm going to just color around the outside of my other eye so that you can see his outline. All right. That's going to be his other eye. that on there, and then I'm gonna outline it so that it's as thick as his other eye. Fill that in all the way around. That just makes his eyes pop out a little more and look like they're more crazy, like a Yeti. And then he has pupils on his eyes, so I'm going to put the pupils in the center, closer to the middle of his eyes. And then also he has like a little circle for a nose that I put in there, which is hard to see when we add all the fur. All right, so that's the face. So we did the blue, then the black, then the red tongue, the teeth, and the eyes. So now that we're done that, we're going to add some fur around. Now at home, you can use a couple different things if you have them. I started out using cotton puffs or cotton balls around the outside, and then we also had some of this craft fur you might have if you're a sewer or if you have lots of craft supplies. So what I'm going to do is cut a piece of this, just a strip of it, a thin strip, to add across the top. So I'm going to use the tacky glue and I'm going to add that piece. Get some glue across the middle of my, and then I'm just going to lay that piece of fur across there, trim it, and then I'm just going to fill in around his head. So if you have your cotton balls, or if you don't have that, you can use some of this fluffy yarn. You can just kind of cut it up and kind of pull it apart and shred it a little bit. And you can add that. So it's whatever you have at home for your craft supplies. You don't need to try to get anything new. Try to use stuff that you already have. So I'm just adding a bunch of glue around his face. And then I'm just going to use pieces and sections of my fur that I have here, my strip. I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to piece it onto my plate. Any pieces that are stuck or coming off of you could just stick onto the glue. And then I'm going to do the same around the bottom. It works better if you use some smaller sections. All right, so you can just work that together and fill in with little pieces of fur. And then if you want to stop there, you can just do a Yeti head, or you can complete his whole body. So if you have enough fur and enough stuff, you can do the lower part and some arms. So I do have another piece here, so I'm going to add that onto his belly. I'm just going to spread some glue all across my plate. Oops. And then I'm going to just take some of my strips of fur that I have extra, and I'm going to add that onto this. So as I keep adding pieces, we'll slowly fill up the whole bottom belly of our Yeti. So you could just keep piecing those in. And once you have enough pieces in, the fur just covers up all the seams, so you really don't have to worry about that too much. You just fluff him up, and that'll fill up. So once you're all done, you'll take 2 strips of paper and cover those with your fur and add them on. And I've stapled those on and taped them so that they're nice and strong. So you can add your arms, or you don't have to. And then you have your Yeti, and you can make your own story about your Yeti.